So I just wanted to clarify some of the misconceptions that have been reported about Apple's quarterly results. A lot of the news headlines about the results are not particularly informative because they're publishing a number without the appropriate accounting context. And interpreting these numbers without the context can be very misleading. For example, there's been a lot of talk and news reported about Apple's year-over-year revenue decline. Now, this has been presented in a way to make it seem as though Apple has lost customers or is losing its customer base, whereas in fact, this is not true. The recent numbers show that Apple is still adding new users and growing its customer base, but simply growing it at a slower rate. So, for example, if the company added 10 users last year and 8 additional users this year, investor sentiment seems to lead one to believe that the company lost 2 users, whereas in fact they had gained 8 users. So let me give you a brief example to illustrate sort of the dynamics at play. Supposing I opened a Costco, or supposing you opened a Costco, and during that first year you added 2 new subscribers and you charged $1 for each annual subscription. So let's say each one of these big blocks is $1, and you can ignore the negative signs on the y-axis. So what would your revenue look like the first year? Well, you have 2 users at $1 each. So the first year you would have $2. And let's say in year 2, the second year, I added another customer. So what would my revenue look like in year 2? Well, I have, assuming that these 2 customers renew their subscription, I would have these 2 plus 1 additional customer. So my revenue looks like this, and my user base growth looks like this. So I had 2 users, and then I grew 1, so my user base is 3. And you can see here that my revenue growth was 50% from year 1 to year 2. So, for people looking just at revenue numbers, they see the revenue growing from 50%, and it's very great news, and you see like some kind of business managing genius. So let's say now you want to improve this business model. What could you do? Well, what if you tried this? What if you tried, instead of charging people 1 year in advance for a 1-year subscription, what if you tried charging them for a 2-year subscription? So in other words, you collect 2 years worth of subscription fees up front. And this way you're guaranteed to lock them in for a longer period of time, and you have more money up front in the beginning. So why not do that? So let's say you were able to work everything out and get all the accounting rules worked out. Now look what happens after you're able to achieve this brilliant result, or land this coup of basically getting the subscription in advance. Well, what happens is that then the first year, your revenue looks like $4. Let's say the first year you had 2 users, then your revenue looks like is 4. So you have $4. What about in year 2? In year 2, you added 1 user, so now your revenue is $2. Now you certainly improved the business because your customer growth is the same. You still went from 2 to 3 customers, and you collected the money up front, so you can do all kinds of things with it. But to the lazy journalist or uninformed investor, all they see is the revenue decline of 50%, because they would have been lulled to sleep by the accounting rules. So if you found a way to recognize revenue up front in accordance with the accounting rules, then they would have severely misidentified the situation. Incidentally, Tesla kind of inverses this graph by using by converting the sales into leases by applying a buyback guarantee. So as a private owner, which business would you rather have? Of course, you'd rather have the improved business model where you're collecting revenue up front and having a 2-year subscription as opposed to a 1-year subscription. And Now let's say you continue running this business in this improved way. Okay, and let's say the first year you had two users, so you collected $4 from the 2 users. And let's say in the second year you had some really amazing deals or some really amazing product in your club. So that year you managed to attract 5 users. So now the revenue for second year is $10 because at $2 per user you have 5 users. Okay, now the third year you add another 2 users. Even without exceptional deals, you still are able to add 2 users. What's the revenue now? Well, it would be $8, assuming that you renewed your original 2 subscribers. So if you were able to renew your original 2 subscribers, you would now have $8 in revenue for the third year. So let's look at the subscriber growth. You started with 2, then you increased by 5, so now you have 7, and then you increase by another 2, so now you have 9. So going forward now, you have a 9-person user base that can renew their subscription. So the business is actually doing very well. But again, if you look only at revenue, what do you see? You see huge growth from year 1 to year 2, and then you see revenue decline. So that may appear as though the business is not doing well, when in fact it's doing, if you overlook this business just because of this figure, you're missing out on a huge, on a massive amount of earnings potential and a massive amount of revenue. Okay, so what does this have to do with Apple? Well, the situation with Apple is not that different, except instead of the club being Costco that you're joining, the club that you're joining is modern communication, being able to communicate with your contemporaries. So just like the membership into Costco, like that gives you access to bulk goods at low prices, membership into the Apple ecosystem gives you access to intimate communication, brand status, and an increasing array of content and services, such as like secure payments, music, movies, and probably in the near future, autonomous transportation services. That's kind of speculative now, but that's what people are saying that they're working on. Secondly, instead of a 1 or 2 year subscription, you have a 3-year subscription. And we're getting this by this figure from a recent Apple environmental report, where they basically say that they model each original iPhone user as having the device for 3 years prior to upgrading to a new device. Now, the company has this data, so it's very likely that this average is very accurate, and it also is corroborated by other independent estimates by analysts that sort of peg the upgrade cycle at somewhere between 2 to 2.75 years. Lastly, the retention rate, instead of being 90%, which is what it is at Costco for North America, Apple has a 95% retention rate in the United States. So these are the estimated unit shipments of iPhones to each region. And their estimates derived by assuming that each recent region has roughly a similar distribution of iPhone sales. Now, in reality, iPhone sales are probably more concentrated in the United States, China, and Japan. So these 3 numbers would probably be a little bit higher, but it would be taking away from numbers such as in Canada, Mexico, and South America, and Asia Pacific. Now you'll note that in the last quarter, Apple sold about 16.9 million iPhones in Q2. Now everyone focuses on this number, this 11% decline from this period before. But let's really look at the number and try to understand what's going on here. So let's ask some questions. So what this means is that roughly 16.9 million people bought iPhones in the last quarter in the US. Well, who are these people? We know it's not new buyers of smartphones, because the high-end smartphone market in the US is relatively mature, so you don't really have new buyers coming in. And we know that some of them are switchers from Android, but that can't account for the majority of them because Apple's share of the US smartphone market hasn't grown that much. So what this means is the vast majority of these people must be from previous iPhone users upgrading their devices. And where are these previous iPhone users coming from? They're coming from the 2013 class, based on the 3-year upgrade cycle. So if you look at this number here, you'll see that there were roughly 12.7 million iPhone buyers in 2013. Now, since the high market didn't really grow, and as we see from this graph here, Apple's market share increased, but not by a significant amount in that time period. So what that means is, to hit the numbers in 2016, the vast majority of iPhone users in this class of 2013 all had to upgrade to iPhones. Here, I just want to emphasize that point. Okay, so that means for the iPhones that Apple sold 3 years ago, almost every customer went out and bought another iPhone at the end of their refresh cycle. Okay, so let's look at China. Now, bear in mind that this estimate is probably a little bit low, because to drive this number, basically I'm taking the percentage of revenue generated from China and then multiplying that by the total iPhones sold. But in reality, the proportion of iPhones sold is probably higher than other countries. So this number would actually be closer to about 13.3 million. But if we adjust for the iPhone amount, but I'm just going to keep this 12.6 because it gives us a little bit more of a conservative number to work with. Since we're working with estimates anyways. And just to be clear, the 13.3 million here would come from probably Canada, Mexico, and the rest of Asia Pacific. So it's not 700,000 additional unit sales. It's just the distribution would actually be different. So anyways, people are looking at this figure, they're very worried about it because they think that the business is deteriorating. But again, we have to go back to that Costco example. So let's examine the mechanics of what actually happened. Well, China is starting with a much smaller class of users in need of a refresh. So for example, they only had 7.5 million people in 2013. So again, we're using a system of point averages here. So if we look at the class of 2013 that refreshed, the class size actually got larger to 12.6. And again, this is using the lower number. The actual number is probably closer to 13.3. Now you say, well, aren't you just dragging out the time period to give the illusion of growth? That's not the point at all. The point is because the market at the high end didn't grow very much, right? Well, we know that the overall market grew 17% in 2014 in China and 3% in 2015. But most of that growth came almost entirely from the low end because it's just late adopters. And we also know you did not have a new form factor here attracting switchers to hit the numbers that we did here, right? So we had a new form factor attracting a lot of switchers. Then, because we don't have these distortions, what we can see is that the vast majority of iPhone users must have chosen to upgrade to another iPhone, even absent the wow factor. So what this quarter is really showing us is that internationally, just like in the US, when the time comes to resubscribe, almost every Apple customer around the world will pay the fee to stay within the Apple ecosystem. And this ecosystem is only getting stickier because, like I said before, the services within the ecosystem are expanding, right? So you go beyond intimate communications to other things like music, secure payments, health monitoring, and now possibly autonomous transportation services, right? So people become more and more reliant on the ecosystem. What else do we know? The user base is growing. The classes of subscribers are getting larger every cycle. It may not be an annual cycle, but smartphones last longer than a year. I'm sorry about that. But think about what happens when the class of 2014 refreshes, or think about what happens when the class of 2015 refreshes, right? This keeps compounding. So I just want to leave you with one last graph to look at for people that are worried about the computer will be replaced or commodification. People have been saying that about the Mac for a very, very long time. And yet this is what the unit sales of the Macintosh actually looks like over the years. So there could be this entire tsunami of revenue from future sales, and the market doesn't even see it coming.